How does a man everyone laughs at for not handling real decisions quietly take control without raising his voice? What happens when the woman who mocked him in public learns that confidence doesn't pay rent, utilities, or contracts? This is how I stopped arguing, and let the bills answer for me. Before we continue, we ask you to hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better. My name is Damon Mercer, and I am 42 years old. For 18 years, I have been an environmental engineer. For 15 years, I have been married to Lauren. For about 6 of those years, I have been a punchline. The Saturday night it all crystallized was unremarkable in every way except for what it revealed. We were hosting dinner. Lauren's idea, Lauren's guest list, Lauren's menu planned down to the garnish. My contribution was financial. The wine, the ingredients, the new tablecloth she insisted we needed. I paid for everything, said nothing, and that was the arrangement neither of us acknowledged. There were 6 of us around that table. Lauren sat at one end, radiant in a green dress she had charged to our shared account 3 days prior. I sat at the other end, invisible in a way that had become comfortable. Between us, Anthony Caldwell and his wife Miranda, Rebecca Holt, and Evan Brooks, friends, acquaintances, witnesses. Anthony was telling a story about a negotiation at his firm, something involving a difficult client and a triumphant resolution. He speaks like a man who expects applause and usually gets it. When he finished, Lauren laughed and reached for her wine. "You know what I admire about you, Anthony? You actually make decisions. Real ones." She glanced my direction, and I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. "Not like this one. Damon doesn't handle real decisions. I handle everything important around here." The table laughed. Not maliciously. That would have been easier to identify, easier to object to. It was casual laughter, the kind that says this is a known thing, an accepted thing, not even worth examining. Anthony raised his glass. "Someone has to steer the ship, right?" "Exactly," Lauren said. "And someone has to—" "What do you do, Damon? Fold laundry?" More laughter. Rebecca covered her mouth, delighted. Even Evan, whom I had known for over a decade, smiled and looked down at his plate. I said nothing. I had learned years ago that defending myself made it worse. Any response became evidence of sensitivity, of overreaction, of proving their point. So I collected the empty appetizer plates and carried them to the kitchen. While I rinsed dishes, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I dried my hands and checked. A notification from our bank. Automatic payment processed. Rent $2,847. I stared at that number for a long moment. $2,847, withdrawn seamlessly from an account bearing my name, paying for an apartment where I was publicly dismissed as irrelevant. The lease was in my name, the utilities were in my name, the insurance, the internet, the streaming services Lauren used every evening. All of it, my name, my signatures, my automatic payments. I put the phone back in my pocket and returned to the dining room, where Lauren was accepting compliments on the main course. "You've outdone yourself," Miranda was saying. Lauren touched her chest modestly. "I just believe in creating an experience, you know? Setting a standard." I sat down and picked up my fork. The notification still glowed in my memory. 2847. Every month. Without discussion, without acknowledgement, without thanks. The rest of the evening proceeded according to script. Anthony dominated conversation. Lauren performed hospitality. Rebecca made observations. I cleared plates, refilled glasses, and existed in the margins of my own home. At 11, our guests began gathering their things. Anthony clapped my shoulder on his way out. "Good seeing you, buddy. Take care of this one." He gestured at Lauren. "She's a force." "I know," I said. When the door closed, Lauren kicked off her heels and sighed with satisfaction. "That went well. Rebecca said we should do this more often." "We should," I agreed. She walked past me toward the bedroom. "Can you handle the cleanup? I'm exhausted." I stood in the doorway of our dining room, our apartment, our life together built on my signature and my income, and watched my wife disappear down the hallway without looking back. "Sure," I said to no one. I cleaned for an hour. The dishes, the counters, the floor where someone had dripped wine without noticing. The whole time, that notification pulsed in my thoughts. Not the amount, I could afford it easily, but the silence around it. The invisibility of my contribution. The way I funded a life that actively mocked me, and no one, including myself, ever mentioned it. When I finally finished, I sat in the dark living room and pulled up my banking app. I scrolled through the transaction history. rent, electric, gas, water, internet, car insurance, health insurance, streaming subscriptions, credit card payments that covered most of what Lauren called her shopping. Every month, thousands of dollars flowing outward from accounts I managed, supporting a household that treated me as furniture. I was not angry. That surprised me. I had expected to feel something sharp and hot, something that demanded action. Instead, I felt only a profound and exhausted clarity. I had been paying for my own humiliation for years, and no one, not Lauren, not our friends, not even myself, had ever said it out loud. I put the phone down and leaned back against the couch cushions. Something had shifted. Something small and precise had moved inside my chest, and it would not move back. I didn't know yet what I would do. I only knew that I had finally seen the architecture of my own erasure, and I could not unsee it. I have been an environmental engineer for 18 years. In that time, I have overseen compliance assessments for facilities processing hazardous materials above legal thresholds. I have signed documents that determined whether corporations face sanctions worth tens of millions. I have sat in rooms with executives and lawyers and told them, calmly and firmly, what they would need to change. No one in those rooms has ever laughed at me. I think about this often. The contrast between the man I am at work and the man I have become at home. At some point, these two identities diverged so completely that they no longer recognize each other. I can trace when it started, though I cannot pinpoint a single moment. Early in our marriage, Lauren and I discussed decisions together. Where to live, what to buy, how to spend weekends. She had opinions. I had opinions. We negotiated. It was ordinary. It was functional. Then, gradually, her opinions became pronouncements. She would decide things and inform me afterward. At first, small things. Paint colors, furniture arrangements, social plans. I didn't mind. I told myself I was being flexible, accommodating, a good partner. I told myself that these things didn't matter enough to argue about. But small concessions accumulate. Each one establishes a precedent. Each time I said, whatever you think is best, I was training both of us that my input was optional. By the time I realized what had happened, weeks would pass without anyone asking my opinion about anything. The public jokes came later. I remember the first one, at a barbecue 3 summers ago. Lauren made some comment about me being easier to manage than a houseplant. A few people laughed. I laughed too, because what else was I supposed to do? Contradicting her in public would have made a scene, and I had long since learned that making scenes led to cold silences and closed doors. After that, the jokes multiplied. Always affectionate in tone, that was the genius of it. Anyone who objected would seem paranoid, humorless, unable to take a lighthearted comment about marriage. Lauren would say I was hopeless with decisions, and the room would chuckle, and I would stand there with the specific knowledge that I had spent the previous week resolving a regulatory dispute that had kept corporate lawyers awake at night. The morning after that dinner party, I drove to work in silence. No podcast, no music. Just the sound of tires on pavement and the quiet hum of thoughts I had been avoiding for years. I parked in my usual spot and sat in the car for several minutes. Through the windshield, I could see the building where I worked, the firm where I was respected, the offices where my judgment carried weight. I thought about walking through those doors and spending 8 hours being trusted, then driving home to be dismissed. The absurdity of it felt almost physical. My colleague Marlo Reeves found me in the break room at lunch, staring at a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. "You all right?" he asked. Marlo was my age, quiet, detail-oriented. We had worked together for 11 years, and I trusted his instincts. "Fine," I said automatically. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. That was the least convincing fine I've heard this month, and I sit through contractor meetings. I managed a small smile, just thinking. About? I looked at my coffee. There was no reason to tell him anything. Marlo and I were colleagues, not close friends. Our conversations rarely extended beyond project timelines and compliance updates, but something about the neutrality of his question made me speak. "Do you ever feel like you're two different people? One version at work, another version everywhere else?" Marlo considered this. "I think everyone compartmentalizes to some degree." "That's not quite what I mean." I set the coffee down. "I mean being genuinely capable in one environment and genuinely dismissed in another, and wondering how that happened." He didn't answer right away, which I appreciated. Marlo never rushed to fill silence. "Relationships can do that," he said finally, "when one person sets the terms and the other person just adapts. Adapts. Concedes. Adjusts. Whatever you want to call it. Over time, the pattern becomes so normal that everyone forgets there was ever a different arrangement." He shrugged. "I've seen it happen. It's hard to reverse because nobody acknowledges it exists. I looked at him. You've seen this? My brother, Marlowe said. Took him 10 years and a separation to remember he was allowed to have opinions. Now he's remarried and doing fine. But it was a long road. We sat in silence for a moment. Through the break room window, I could see colleagues moving through the hallway, engineers, analysts, administrators, competent people doing important work. Like me. Thanks, I said. For what? I didn't know how to answer that. Just, thanks. That evening, I got home before Lauren. The apartment was quiet, still bearing traces of the previous night's dinner party, a forgotten coaster on an end table, the faint smell of candles. I walked through the rooms slowly, examining them as if for the first time. The furniture we had chosen together, except we hadn't, really. Lauren had chosen it, and I had agreed. The artwork on the walls, her taste, the color of the curtains, the arrangement of the bookshelves, the dishes in the cabinets. All of it reflected a single vision, a single authority, a single decision-maker. My presence in this apartment was financial. I paid for these rooms, but I did not inhabit them. At 7, I heard her key in the door. Lauren swept in carrying takeout bags. I stopped for sushi, she announced, setting containers on the counter. You can fend for yourself tonight. I'm meeting Rebecca for drinks at 8. Okay, I said. She didn't look at me as she transferred food onto plates. What did you do today? I thought about compliance reports. I thought about liability assessments. I thought about the signature I had placed on a document that afternoon, authorizing a remediation process with a budget larger than our annual household expenses. Nothing much, I said. Routine stuff. Lauren nodded absently. I figured. You wouldn't understand the financials anyway. That's more my area. She said it casually, the way someone might mention the weather. Just a fact. Unremarkable and unchallengeable. I watched her eat sushi from containers I would pay for later and listened to her describe her plans for the evening. Rebecca wanted to try a new wine bar. They might go shopping afterward if the mood struck. Sounds fun, I said. Lauren finished her meal, changed clothes, and left at 7:45. The apartment door closed behind her like a period at the end of a sentence. I sat in the quiet and thought about what Marlowe had said. Patterns becoming normal. Nobody acknowledging they exist. I opened my laptop and began making a list. The second dinner party came 3 weeks later. Lauren organized it, as always. Same guest list, same structure, same script. I knew from the moment she mentioned it that the evening would follow established patterns. I was not wrong. This time, we were at Anthony and Miranda's house, their expansive condo in a neighborhood that screamed success. Anthony gave us a tour of his new home office, pointing out the standing desk and the view. Lauren walked beside him, admiring everything with practiced enthusiasm. When we settled in the living room for pre-dinner drinks, the conversation turned predictably to household management. Miranda was talking about a contractor issue. Rebecca described a dispute with her landlord. Everyone had opinions, strategies, small victories to report. Then Lauren set down her wine glass and smiled. You all know I'm the decision maker in our house. Damon just goes along with whatever. She laughed and gestured toward me. It's really quite simple. I plan, I manage, I lead. He follows, works for us. The room responded on cue. Chuckles, nods, knowing looks exchanged between couples who apparently recognized this dynamic and approved of it. Anthony raised his glass. Nothing wrong with knowing your roles, right? Exactly, Lauren agreed. Lead, follow, or get out of the way. Damon knows where he stands. Rebecca leaned forward. Honestly, Lauren, it's refreshing how open you are about it. Most couples pretend they're equals when really someone's in charge. You just own it. What's the point of pretending? Lauren said. I make the decisions because I'm better at it. Damon knows that. Right, honey? Everyone turned to look at me. I was holding a glass of whiskey I hadn't sipped. I felt the weight of their attention, the expectation that I would agree, deflect, play the role assigned to me. And perhaps a month earlier, I would have. I would have smiled and shrugged and made some self-deprecating comment that kept the peace. But something had changed in those 3 weeks. I had spent long hours looking at spreadsheets. I had sat in my car at night, thinking through the shape of my own erasure. I had started to understand, with mathematical precision, exactly how dependent this household was on my invisible contribution. Sure, I said quietly. Whatever you say. Lauren beamed. The room relaxed. Everyone returned to their drinks and their comfortable assumptions. I watched them all. Evan Brooks was there again, sitting beside his wife Kara, a woman so quiet I sometimes forgot she existed. Evan caught my eye for a moment, and I thought I saw something complicated in his expression. Discomfort, maybe, or recognition. Then he looked away and reached for the cheese plate. Nobody objected. That was the thing I kept noticing. Nobody ever objected. They laughed or nodded or changed the subject, but nobody ever said, "That seems unkind," or "Shouldn't Damon speak for himself?" The social structure operated on consensus, and the consensus was that my irrelevance was acceptable. Dinner was served on expensive plates. The meal was excellent. Anthony had hired a caterer, which meant this gathering was designed to impress. I ate without tasting much. I participated when spoken to. I watched the clock. At some point, conversation turned to household budgets. Miranda mentioned their property taxes. Anthony discussed investment strategies. And Lauren, seizing an opportunity, launched into a monologue about fiscal responsibility. "Managing a household is no different from managing a business," she said confidently. "You have to track every dollar, anticipate expenses, make tough calls. I handle all of that for us." I took a sip of my whiskey. "It's a lot of work," she continued, "but someone has to do it. Damon isn't really equipped for that kind of thinking, no offense, honey, so it falls to me." The table nodded along. I wondered how many of them knew that the utilities were in my name. I wondered if any of them had considered who actually paid the bills that Lauren apparently managed. Probably not. Why would they? The evening ended late. Lauren was tipsy and happy on the drive home, recounting her favorite moments of the party, analyzing who said what and what it meant. I drove in silence, watching the highway lines disappear beneath us. "You were quiet tonight," she said, somewhere around mile marker 47. "Was I?" "You're always quiet, but somehow quieter than usual." I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel. "Just tired." She accepted this explanation, or pretended to, and returned to her recap of the evening. When we got home, Lauren went straight to bed. I said I needed to wind down first. I sat in my car in the parking garage for over an hour. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. I had started doing this recently, recording short fragments of thought, playing them back, listening to myself articulate things I had never said aloud. I pressed record. "It happened again tonight," I said into the quiet. "Same jokes, same assumptions, same silence from everyone who should know better. I don't think I'm angry anymore. I think I'm just finished. Finished explaining. Finished defending. Finished pretending it doesn't matter." I paused, watching the seconds tick on the recording timer. "I need to stop explaining," I said. "That's the key. I keep thinking if I just explain myself better, if I just make them understand, it will change something. But it won't. Words don't change structures. Actions do." I saved the recording and sat in the darkness for a while longer. Upstairs, all the lights were off. Lauren was sleeping peacefully in an apartment paid for by a man she had publicly called incapable of financial thinking. I started the car and drove around the block twice, slowly, before returning to my parking spot. I wasn't ready to go inside yet. I wasn't sure I would ever be ready again, but I was starting to know what I would do next. Patricia Langford's office was on the 8th floor of a building downtown, the kind of building with marble floors and security desks and the hushed atmosphere of expensive professional services. I had found her through careful research, a referral from a colleague who had gone through his own marital restructuring some years back. He hadn't shared details, just a name and a phone number, with the quiet understanding that some questions don't need to be asked aloud. She specialized, according to her website, in contracts, marital finance boundaries, and asset separation. The language was carefully neutral, designed to convey competence without suggesting drama, exactly what I needed. I had called her office the previous week and scheduled a consultation for Tuesday at 2 o'clock. I did not tell Lauren. I blocked out my calendar at work with a vague notation about an off-site meeting. I parked in a garage 3 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, as if avoiding surveillance, though I knew logically that no one was watching. Old habits of invisibility, I suppose, or perhaps just caution. The waiting room was designed to inspire confidence. Leather chairs in deep burgundy, abstract art in muted colors, tasteful lighting that suggested both warmth and professionalism. Magazines fanned across a glass table, financial publications, lifestyle journals, nothing too casual. The receptionist offered me water or coffee. I declined both. I sat for 7 minutes, watching the second hand sweep around a clock on the wall. Each tick marked another moment of decision, another step towards something irreversible. Then an assistant emerged and led me down a carpeted hallway to Patricia's corner office, where she rose from behind a large walnut desk to shake my hand. "Mr. Mercer, please, sit." Patricia Langford was in her early 50s, silver-haired in a way that seemed intentional rather than inevitable, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. Her handshake was firm without being aggressive, her grip lasting exactly the right number of seconds. Everything about her projected calm competence, the kind of competence I recognized because I cultivated it myself in professional settings. "Thank you for seeing me," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Of course." She returned to her seat and opened a leather folder, her pen poised above a fresh page. "You mentioned on the phone that you had some questions about household financial structures. That's a broad topic. Want to tell me more about your specific situation?" I had rehearsed this conversation in my head for days. I had prepared bullet points, organized facts, anticipated questions. I had practiced in my car, in the shower, in the quiet moments before sleep. But sitting in that office, facing someone who had no preconceptions about me, who didn't think of me as Lauren's background noise or the punchline to standing jokes, I found myself speaking more freely than I had in years. "I've been married for 15 years, I began. "During that time, I've gradually taken on responsibility for all major household expenses. Rent, utilities, insurance, all of it runs through accounts in my name, funded by my income. My wife participates in spending decisions but doesn't contribute directly to these obligations. She works, but her income goes toward her personal expenses and discretionary purchases." Patricia nodded, making notes in a careful script. "That's not unusual. Many households operate with one primary earner covering fixed costs while the other handles personal spending." "I understand. What concerns me is the visibility of this arrangement, or rather, the complete invisibility." I paused, choosing my words with the same precision I would apply to a regulatory assessment. "My wife has publicly, repeatedly, claimed authority over our household decisions. She presents herself as the manager, the leader, the person in charge of everything important. She has stated in social settings that I am incapable of handling finances, that I don't understand money, that I couldn't manage a checkbook if my life depended on it." I watched Patricia's expression shift slightly, a professional's careful attention becoming something more personal. "Meanwhile," I continued, "every bill, every contract, every payment, all of it is in my name. I maintain everything. She maintains—" The image of maintaining everything. Patricia set down her pen and studied me with keen eyes. "And what are you hoping to accomplish by coming here?" It was the question I had been asking myself for weeks, the question that had kept me awake at 3 a.m, the question I had recorded into my phone and voice memos that no one else would ever hear. I considered my answer carefully before speaking. "I want to understand my options," I said. "Not to harm anyone, not to create unnecessary conflict, just to understand what happens if I step back from obligations that aren't acknowledged, if I stop funding a structure that publicly dismisses my contribution, if I let the person who claims to manage everything actually have to manage something." She studied me for a long moment, and I had the sense of being assessed by someone who had seen many people in my position before. "You're asking about exposure?" "Yes." "Whose name is on the lease?" "Mine, only mine. Lauren's name was never added." "The utilities?" "All mine. Electric, gas, water, internet." "Insurance policies?" "Mine. Both vehicles, renter's coverage, the umbrella policy. All of it tied to my accounts, my credit history, my signature." Patricia was quiet, reviewing her notes, calculating something in her head. "Mr. Mercer, if you were to simply cease payment on these obligations, the consequences would fall on whoever's name appears on the accounts. That would be you. Damage to your credit, legal liability, potential eviction proceedings, all of it would attach to your record, not hers." "I understand that. But," she continued, leaning forward slightly, "there are other options. You could transfer certain accounts. You could separate your name from joint obligations and allow your wife to establish new accounts in her own name. You could restructure the financial architecture of your household so that responsibility aligns with, shall we say, acknowledged authority." I leaned forward as well. "Tell me more about that." For the next 45 minutes, Patricia walked me through possibilities I hadn't fully considered. There were legal nuances, protections I hadn't known existed, procedures that could be executed quietly and with minimal confrontation. Nothing she described was dramatic or aggressive. It was all paperwork, signatures, forms, notifications sent through proper channels, administrative actions. The most powerful tools are often the most boring. That was something I had learned in environmental compliance. The regulations that changed corporate behavior weren't the dramatic ones with headlines and investigations. They were the quiet ones, the procedural requirements, the forms that had to be filed, the boxes that had to be checked. The same was true here. "The key," Patricia said as our session neared its end, "is that you're not doing anything hostile. You're not hiding assets or violating any agreements. You're simply reallocating responsibility. If your wife genuinely believes she manages the household, then she should be able to manage it without your name attached to everything. If she can't, that's a gap in her own preparedness, not an action on your part. I nodded slowly, the logic settling into place. How long would something like this take? Depends on how many accounts we're talking about and how quickly you want to proceed. Lease modifications require landlord cooperation, and you might need to frame it as adding her name to the lease jointly, then eventually removing yourself. That takes time and negotiation. Utilities are simpler. Some can be switched within days with the right paperwork. Insurance takes longer, usually 2 to 4 weeks for policy transfers. And if I don't want to remove myself entirely, if I just want to pause? Patricia raised an eyebrow. You can stop automatic payments without closing accounts. Temporarily. Suspending is different from terminating. The accounts would remain in your name, but the payments would simply not process. Would she receive notices? Eventually, depending on the billing cycle and the grace periods involved. Some services give warning notifications, texts, emails, that kind of thing. Others just stop, and then send past due notices afterward. I thought about Lauren checking her phone, seeing alerts she had never seen before, suddenly confronting the infrastructure she had always taken for granted. What would you recommend, I asked, for someone in my situation who wants clarity without destruction, who wants to make a point without burning everything down? Patricia considered the question, tapping her pen against her legal pad. I'd recommend a combination approach. Transfer what you can. Utilities are easy, low stakes. Pause what's more complex. The rent, for example. Let her see the consequences gradually rather than all at once, and protect yourself legally throughout. Document everything, keep copies, make sure your actions are defensible if questions arise later. I left Patricia's office with a folder of documents and a clearer understanding of my own position. The folder was thin, just a few forms, some informational sheets, her business card clipped to the inside cover, but it felt heavier than it was. It felt like possibility. I walked back to my car through the downtown streets, past office workers on their lunch breaks, past delivery trucks double parked in front of restaurants, past all the ordinary activity of a Tuesday afternoon. No one looked at me twice. I was just another middle-aged man in business casual, carrying a folder, thinking thoughts no one could guess. I was not planning to harm anyone. I was not seeking revenge in any dramatic sense. I was simply, methodically examining a machine I had been powering silently for years and considering what would happen if I stepped away from the controls. That evening, Lauren told me about her plans for another dinner party. Same group, she said, scrolling through her phone at the kitchen counter while I made dinner. Saturday, 2 weeks from now. I'm thinking Italian this time. I saw this amazing recipe online. Handmade pasta, a 3-hour sauce, the whole thing. Sounds lovely, I said. She looked up briefly, already back to her planning. You'll handle the groceries, right? I'll text you the list. And the wine. Anthony has been talking about some Cabernet he had in Napa. See if you can find something comparable. Of course. I watched her return to her phone, secure in the knowledge that everything would be taken care of. The groceries, the wine, the rent, the electricity, the infrastructure that allowed her to perform authority without bearing responsibility. I set a calendar reminder on my own phone. Dinner. Saturday. And then I called Patricia Langford's office and scheduled a follow-up appointment for the following week. Her assistant found an opening on Tuesday at 3:30. I blocked it in my calendar the same way I had blocked the first one, vague, unmemorable, invisible, just like everything else I did. But not for much longer. The next 2 weeks passed with a strange quality, stretched and compressed at the same time. I moved through routines that had defined my life for 15 years, but they felt different now. I saw the structure behind every action, the invisible framework I had built and maintained with such careful dedication that even I had forgotten it was there. Every morning, I woke at 6:15. Every morning, I showered while Lauren slept. Every morning, I made coffee in a kitchen I paid for, in an apartment secured by my signature, surrounded by furniture chosen by someone who believed I had no opinions worth considering. The routine was unchanged, but my awareness of it had sharpened into something almost painful. At my second meeting with Patricia Langford, we worked through specifics in her quiet office. The afternoon light filtered through expensive blinds, casting geometric shadows across her desk. She had prepared documents, account transfer forms, payment suspension authorizations, address change requests. I reviewed each one carefully, asking questions, making notes in the margins. You understand, Patricia said, tapping her pen against the folder, that timing matters here. If you want maximum impact, maximum visibility, the changes need to process at a moment when your wife is not expecting them, when she's otherwise occupied, when witnesses are present. I understand. And you're certain about the scope? All the accounts we discussed? I thought about it for a long moment before answering. Through the window behind Patricia, I could see the city stretching toward the horizon. Office buildings, apartment complexes, thousands of households running on infrastructure someone maintained. How many of those maintainers were invisible too? How many kept everything running while someone else took credit? The rent, nearly $3,000 monthly. The utilities, electric, gas, water, internet, another $400 combined. Car insurance on both vehicles, renter's insurance. The streaming subscriptions Lauren used every evening, the delivery memberships that brought packages to our door 3 times a week. Everything I had maintained in silence for 15 years, while being told I couldn't handle financial thinking. All of them, I said. Patricia nodded, her expression professionally neutral, but with something like respect in her eyes. She handed me a pen, heavy, silver, the kind that costs more than some people's weekly groceries. Then let's begin. I signed documents without emotion. Each signature was calm, deliberate. No rage, no trembling hands, no dramatic pause before the pen touched paper. I was doing administrative work, nothing more. The same kind of paperwork I processed daily at the firm, the same methodical attention to detail that had earned me promotions and trust from colleagues who understood what competence looked like. The key payments were scheduled for reassignment. The rent payment that had been automatically withdrawn for years would not process on the upcoming cycle. Patricia had confirmed the timing. Saturday morning, the funds would attempt to transfer, authorization would fail, and the notice would generate. Utilities would continue for now, but were pending transfer to accounts Lauren would need to establish herself if she wanted them to remain active. Insurance policies required notice of name removal. Those changes would take longer, but the process was underway. I prepared no speech. I planned no confrontation. That was the whole point. To say nothing, to initiate nothing, to simply let the mechanics I had been managing silently finally become visible. Words had failed me for 6 years. Words had been turned against me, twisted into jokes, used as evidence of my supposed passivity. Now I would let the silence speak instead. One more thing, Patricia said as I finished the last signature and returned her expensive pen. You might want to think about where you'll go after. If things become difficult at home? I had already thought about it. There was a hotel near my office, nothing fancy, just clean and quiet. I had checked their availability the previous week, noted the rates, confirmed they had rooms available for extended stays. I had also taken inventory of what I would need to take with me, documents, essential clothing, my laptop, the important things. Everything else could stay behind. I have a plan, I said. Patricia smiled slightly, a crack in her professional composure. I had a feeling you would. Men in your position, the ones who actually change things instead of just complaining about them, they're always the ones who plan ahead. I thought about that assessment on the drive home. Men in my position. How many of us were there? How many sat in offices or cars or quiet corners, watching the architecture of our own erasure and wondering when we had agreed to disappear? Back at the apartment, Lauren was deep in party preparations. The dining room had been transformed into a staging area for her creative vision. She tested recipes in our kitchen, sampling sauces and adjusting seasonings with the focused intensity of a surgeon. She arranged table decorations on the dining room table, stepping back to assess the effect, then rearranging everything again because the centerpiece was not quite right. The coral napkins, she decided, holding both options up to the light from the window. More festive, more welcoming, don't you think? I agree, I said. She didn't need my agreement. She had already chosen. But the performance of consultation was part of her process, and I had long since learned my role in it. Agree, accommodate, disappear. The 3 verbs of my domestic existence. I watched her move through the apartment with confidence and purpose. She was genuinely good at this. The hosting, the aesthetics, the social choreography. If I was being honest, I had always admired her ability to create atmosphere, to make guests feel welcomed and entertained. She had a gift for presentation that I lacked, an instinct for making spaces feel special. But admiration and respect are not the same thing. And somewhere along the way, she had stopped offering me either. Can you pick up the wine tomorrow? She asked without looking up from the napkin arrangement. I'll text you the list. 2 reds, 3 whites, and that sparkling one that Anthony liked last time. Of course. And remind me about the flowers. I want to order from that new place on 5th. Their arrangements are supposed to be extraordinary. I'll remind you. She nodded, satisfied that the machinery was operating as expected. The machinery called Damon, reliable and invisible, always there when needed, never requiring attention or maintenance. That night, after she went to bed, I sat at my desk in the living room corner and reviewed the timeline Patricia had laid out. The documents were stored in a folder on my laptop, encrypted with a password Lauren would never guess because she had never asked about my digital life. The payments would process, or not process, on Saturday morning. By the time Lauren's dinner party began in the evening, the notifications would have started arriving. I had chosen this timing deliberately. Not out of cruelty, though I knew some might see it that way. Out of clarity. Out of the understanding that if the truth was going to become visible, it should become visible in front of the people who had witnessed the lies. The same audience that had laughed at me would now see what I had been carrying all along. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a while, listening to the sounds of the apartment settling around me, the refrigerator humming its constant song, a distant siren wailing somewhere in the city, the soft creak of floorboards as the building shifted and breathed, 15 years of marriage, 6 years of jokes, countless nights of silence. And now, finally, something different, something true. The week before the dinner party, I existed in two worlds simultaneously. In one world, I was the same Damon I had always been. I went to work, attended meetings, signed documents that affected regulatory compliance worth millions of dollars. I came home, agreed with Lauren's decisions, and went through the motions of a marriage that had lost its foundation years ago. I played my role with the same competence I brought to everything else, invisibly, reliably, without complaint. In the other world, I was preparing, quietly, methodically. With the same attention to detail I brought to environmental compliance assessments, the same careful documentation I would apply to any project with significant consequences. I moved some personal items to my office in stages, spreading the transfers across several days to avoid detection. Not enough to be noticed at home, just essentials, a change of clothes in a gym bag, toiletries in a desk drawer, important documents I didn't want to have to retrieve later. My departure bag, I thought of it. Ready when needed. My passport. The title to my car, bank statements showing the accounts that were solely in my name, a folder of receipts from years of payments Lauren had never acknowledged. Evidence, though, I hoped I wouldn't need it. Preparation for questions I hoped would never be asked. I reviewed my finances one more time on Tuesday evening, sitting in my car in the office parking lot with my laptop balanced on the steering wheel. The numbers were clear, irrefutable, documented. The rent was the largest, nearly $3,000 that would simply not transfer this month. The utilities were smaller but cumulative. Electric at $92, gas at $47, water at $31, internet at $89. Each one a thread in the fabric of daily life, each one invisible until it vanished. The insurance policies were more complex. Car insurance on both vehicles at $216 monthly, renter's insurance at $43. Those changes would take weeks to fully process, but the paperwork was filed, the clock was ticking. On Wednesday, I had coffee with Marlo at a small cafe near the office. The place was quiet in the late afternoon, only a few other customers scattered at distant tables. Marlo had noticed something different about me, he said. A calmness he couldn't quite identify. A steadiness that seemed new. You seem more settled, he observed, stirring his coffee slowly. Like you've made a decision about something, like you've found solid ground. I have? Want to talk about it? I considered the question. Marlo had been kind to me, in his quiet way. He had listened without judgment and offered perspective without pressure. He had shared his brother's story without expectation of reciprocity. He deserved some truth, even if I couldn't share all of it. I'm making changes, I said. At home? Structural changes. He nodded slowly, understanding more than I was saying. The kind we discussed before? Similar. I've consulted with a lawyer. Everything is proceeding, administratively. That's a very careful way to describe it. Careful is what I'm aiming for. No drama, no confrontation, just reallocation, shifting responsibility to where it's been claimed all along. Marlo sipped his coffee, his expression thoughtful. And your wife doesn't know? She'll find out this weekend. At another dinner party? I didn't answer, but my silence was answer enough. Marlo had always been perceptive. That's going to be intense, he said quietly. Maybe. But it's also going to be honest, for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his words, deciding how much to say. I hope it works out, he said finally. Whatever working out means in this situation. Thank you. And if you need a place to stay afterward, I have a guest room. It's nothing fancy, but it's private, just for a few days if needed. The offer surprised me. We had never been close outside of work, never socialized beyond the occasional lunch or coffee, but there was something genuine in his expression, something that reminded me that not everyone in my life had dismissed me. Some people had simply been waiting for me to stop dismissing myself. I appreciate that, I said, truly. We finished our coffee in comfortable silence, then returned to the office. I spent the afternoon reviewing contracts and signing authorizations, the same work I did every day, the same competence that was invisible to everyone at Lauren's dinner parties. The same man who couldn't handle real decisions, according to my wife, approving remediation expenses that exceeded her annual income, but not for much longer. Thursday evening, I came home to find Lauren on the phone with Rebecca, planning the final details of Saturday's gathering. She was pacing through the apartment, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing with her free hand as if Rebecca could see her enthusiasm. Yes, the same group, she was saying. 7 o'clock. Tell Anthony to bring that wine he was raving about, the Cabernet from Napa. Miranda said the appetizers I made last time were divine, so I'm doing those again. I moved past her to the kitchen, getting a glass of water, listening to her voice rise and fall with hosting energy. It's going to be perfect, she said. Absolutely perfect. I've got everything under control, every detail. You know how I am about details. I thought about the notifications that would arrive Saturday morning, the rent confirmation that would not appear, the utility alerts that would start trickling in, the cracks in the foundation that would become visible one by one, everything under control. I almost smiled. Friday arrived with that peculiar quality of anticipation that only significant days carry. The air itself seemed different, charged with the potential energy of what was coming. I woke early, before the alarm, before the light had fully penetrated the bedroom curtains. I lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the morning. Distant traffic, the neighbor's television through the walls, Lauren's soft breathing beside me. I showered and dressed in my usual work clothes. Lauren was still asleep, one arm thrown across the pillow where my head had been, breathing softly in the pre-dawn darkness. I stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment, watching her. 15 years. We had built something together, or at least I thought we had. There had been good years at the beginning, genuine partnership, mutual respect. But looking at her now, I realized I couldn't remember when those years had ended. The transition had been so gradual, so incremental, that by the time I noticed the change, it was already complete. What had we built? A routine, certainly. A set of habits and assumptions, an arrangement where I contributed everything invisible and she claimed everything visible. A marriage, technically. But a partnership? That had ended so gradually I couldn't pinpoint when. I left for work without waking her. The door closed softly behind me. She wouldn't even know I had been watching. At the office, I went through my day with unusual focus, channeling all my concentration into tasks that mattered, that had consequences, that were recognized by people who understood the value of what I did. There was satisfaction in completing work, in exercising the competence that was respected and valued here. My colleagues asked my opinions. My supervisors trusted my assessments. In this environment, I was exactly who I had always been, capable, thorough, reliable. At noon, I received a notification on my phone. The first domino had fallen. The automatic rent payment, scheduled to process that morning, had been declined. The authorization I had removed was now having its effect. Payment declined. Insufficient authorization. Please contact your financial institution. I stared at the screen for a long moment. There was no going back now. The machinery was in motion, the gears turning, the invisible becoming visible, one notification at a time. The landlord would send a notice, probably Monday, given the weekend. Lauren would receive it, would see my name on the account, would realize that the foundation she had been standing on was mine. Questions would be asked, explanations would be demanded. But none of that would happen until after her perfect dinner party, after her performance. After she told everyone one more time that I didn't handle real decisions. I put my phone away and returned to work. That evening, I stopped at a store and bought the wine Lauren had requested. 2 bottles of a Sonoma Chardonnay she favored, a red blend that Anthony had mentioned at the last gathering, a sparkling wine for toasts. I examined each bottle carefully, checking vintages and labels, doing exactly what was expected of me. I also picked up flowers, the ones she had mentioned from the shop on 5th. White roses and pale greenery, arranged in a way that suggested both elegance and effortlessness. Expensive. Beautiful. Exactly what she wanted. I did everything she expected, played every note of the role I had been assigned. The perfect supporting actor, reliable and invisible. She would never be able to say I had sabotaged her party. The groceries would be there. The appetizers, the main course ingredients, the dessert components. The wine would be chilled to proper temperature. The flowers would be arranged in the crystal vase she preferred. Everything she needed to perform her authority would be in place. Only the foundation would be missing. I arrived home to find Lauren in full preparation mode. She had laid out serving dishes in rows on the kitchen counter, polished glasses until they gleamed, arranged candles at precise intervals throughout the apartment. The dining room looked like a photograph from a lifestyle magazine. "Perfect timing," she said, barely glancing at me. "Put the flowers in water and then stay out of my way. I need to focus." Of course. I did as she asked, trimming stems, arranging blooms in the vase, positioning it exactly where she would want it. Then I retreated to the small desk in the corner of the living room. From there, I could watch her move through the space, confident and commanding, the director of her own show. My phone buzzed quietly in my pocket. Another notification, this one from the electric company, confirming that account transfer paperwork had been received. Processing would begin Monday. Within 2 weeks, the account would be in limbo, waiting for a new owner to claim it. I silenced the phone and continued watching Lauren. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, she was still in her element, still secure in her assumptions, still certain that the infrastructure of her life would continue humming along invisibly beneath her. Still confident that the man who paid for everything would continue paying forever, without recognition or thanks. Because that was what he did. Because that was who he was. She didn't know that the person she thought I was had already ceased to exist. I felt no satisfaction in what was coming, but I felt no guilt either. Only the quiet certainty of a man who had finally decided to stop carrying weight that was never acknowledged. Only the calm of someone who had made a decision and was no longer burdened by indecision. The flowers looked beautiful in their vase, catching the last of the evening light through the window. Lauren glanced at them briefly, assessing their placement. She didn't thank me for buying them. Saturday morning, I woke before Lauren again. I made coffee, drank it in the quiet kitchen, and checked my phone. The notifications had multiplied overnight. Rent, past due notice pending, electric, account transfer in progress, gas, payment review required. Each message was a small crack in the wall of invisibility I had maintained for 15 years. Lauren would see them soon. Not this morning, she was too focused on dinner preparations, but soon. The alerts would pile up until they were impossible to ignore. I deleted the notifications from my own phone. There was no need to track them anymore. The process was in motion. By mid-morning, Lauren was a whirlwind of activity. She cooked, she arranged, she adjusted, she perfected. I was assigned tasks, moving furniture, setting up chairs, transporting dishes, and I completed them without comment. "You're being unusually helpful today," she observed at one point. "Just want everything to go smoothly." She accepted this with a distracted nod and returned to her preparations. By late afternoon, the apartment was transformed. The dining table gleamed under carefully positioned lighting. The food smelled excellent, the wine was chilled to precise temperatures. Everything was ready for Lauren's performance. And for mine. I showered and changed into a clean shirt. I looked at myself in the mirror. 42 years old, graying slightly at the temples, otherwise unremarkable. A man who could disappear into the background of any gathering. Not tonight, though. Tonight, the background would become foreground. Lauren was adding final touches to the table when I emerged. She glanced at me briefly, assessing. "You look fine. Not great, but fine." "Thank you," I said without irony. "Guests arrive at 7. Be ready to take coats." "I will." She nodded once and returned to her arrangements. In her mind, the evening was already unfolding according to plan. She knew exactly what would happen, exactly who would say what, exactly how she would navigate the social currents of the room. She was wrong, of course, but she didn't know that yet. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Through the window, I could see the city stretching out below, buildings, streets, thousands of lives proceeding in parallel. Somewhere out there, utility databases were updating. Banking systems were processing declines. The machinery of my withdrawal was grinding forward, invisible but inexorable. I drank my water and waited for 7 o'clock. The guests arrived in predictable order. Anthony and Miranda first, Anthony booming greetings and handing over a bottle of expensive wine. Miranda kissed Lauren's cheek and admired the decorations. I took their coats and carried them to the bedroom. Rebecca next, alone as usual, dressed in something bright that demanded attention. She swept into the apartment with commentary already flowing, about traffic, about restaurants, about someone named Derek who had apparently done something unforgivable. Finally, Evan and Kara, apologizing for their tardiness, blaming a last-minute situation with a neighbor's car blocking their driveway. Evan caught my eye as I took his jacket, and I thought I saw a flicker of something. Curiosity, maybe, or the faint unease of someone who senses approaching change. "Good to see you," he said. "You too." We gathered in the living room for drinks. Anthony immediately launched into a story about a recent business trip, dominating the conversation with practiced ease. Lauren circulated, refilling glasses, receiving compliments on the appetizers, glowing with hostess energy. I sat in my usual corner and watched. The phones were on the table. Everyone had placed them face up or face down nearby, within easy reach, as people always do. Small rectangles of glass and metal, waiting to deliver their messages. Any moment now. Lauren announced that dinner was ready, and we migrated to the dining room. The table was beautiful. She had truly outdone herself. Candles cast warm light over crystal glasses and polished silverware. The food was arranged with the precision of a magazine photo shoot. "This is incredible, Lauren," Miranda said. "You're a miracle worker." "I try," Lauren smiled. "Someone has to keep things running." We took our seats. Lauren at one end, confident and radiant. Me at the other, quiet as always. The performance was about to begin. I looked around the table at these people I had known for years. Anthony, loud and certain. Miranda, pleasant and agreeable. Rebecca, sharp and performative. Evan, watchful but passive. Kara, nearly invisible. They were about to witness something none of them expected. The first course was served. Conversation flowed. At some point, Lauren would make her usual jokes about my incompetence, and everyone would laugh, and the social order would reinforce itself. Except tonight, the social order was about to receive new information. I ate my salad and waited. The phone sat silent for now, but I knew that wouldn't last. Somewhere in the background, systems were processing. Notifications were being generated. The invisible was preparing to become visible. Anthony told another story. Rebecca made a witty observation. Lauren guided the conversation with practiced skill. I passed the breadbasket when asked and kept my eyes on the table. Any moment now. The joke came, as it always did, between the main course and dessert. Lauren was telling the table about a home improvement decision. New curtains for the bedroom, something about thread count and light filtration, the kind of detail she could spin into a 20-minute monologue. "Of course, I made all the choices myself," she said, gesturing with her wine glass. "Damon wouldn't know the difference between linen and polyester if his life depended on it." The table chuckled on cue. "You know what I love about our marriage?" Lauren continued, warming to her theme. "I'm the brain, and he's the—" She paused, pretending to search for words. "Well, I'm not sure what he is. Background noise, maybe?" More laughter. Anthony raised his glass in appreciation. "Seriously, though." Lauren leaned forward, addressing the group like a keynote speaker. "I handle everything important in this household. The finances, the planning, every real decision. Damon just exists, follows along. You all know how it is." She looked at me, expecting the usual agreement. I said nothing. The first phone buzzed. Miranda glanced at her purse reflexively. Anthony ignored his pocket. But Rebecca's phone, face up on the table beside her plate, lit up with a notification she couldn't help but glimpse. She frowned slightly but said nothing. Then Lauren's phone buzzed. And Anthony's. Almost simultaneously, a cascade of electronic chirps and vibrations spread around the table like a small earthquake. Lauren picked up her phone, still smiling, prepared to silence whatever distraction had interrupted her performance. Then her expression changed. It was subtle at first, a slight tightening around her eyes, a brief pause in her confident posture. She stared at her screen, then scrolled, then stared again. "What the—" she whispered. I sipped my water and waited. Lauren looked up at me. There was something in her face I had rarely seen before. Confusion. Genuine, unmanaged confusion. "Damon, did you— What is this?" "What's what?" She held up her phone. "The rent. It says payment failed, that the automatic transfer was declined." I nodded slowly. "That's correct." The table had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now. "But—" Lauren shook her head. "That can't be right. You pay the rent. That's what you do." "I used to," I said calmly. I stopped. Her phone buzzed again. Then Rebecca's. Then the silence was broken by another notification. "The electricity," Lauren said. Her voice was different now, higher, edged with alarm. "It says the account is pending transfer. What does that mean?" "It means the account is no longer in my name." Anthony cleared his throat. "What's going on here, Damon?" I looked at him, at his confused face, at the man who had spent years amplifying my wife's narrative of my irrelevance. "I'm doing what Lauren always said I should do," I said. "I'm stepping back from decisions, real ones." Lauren stood up from her chair, phone clutched in her hand. You can't do this. Everything runs through your accounts." "Exactly. I remained seated, voice level. Everything has run through my accounts for 15 years. The rent, the electricity, the gas, the internet, the insurance on both our cars, the streaming services, the delivery memberships, all of it, in my name, paid by me, for a household that told itself, that told everyone, that I don't handle real decisions. The silence was extraordinary. Rebecca's phone buzzed again. She stared at it with growing alarm. I don't... Lauren's voice trailed off. She was scrolling frantically now, checking accounts, opening apps. The car insurance. It says there's a pending. Damon, what did you do? I stopped handling things you said I couldn't handle anyway. I pushed back my chair and stood. You've told everyone for years that you manage this household, that you make the decisions, that I'm just along for the ride. So now you can. Manage it, without my name on anything. But I don't have accounts for any of this. Then you'll need to create them. Lauren stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. The confident hostess, the master of ceremonies, the woman who had publicly mocked my capabilities to amuse audiences, she looked suddenly lost. How am I supposed to? Figure it out, I said. That's what leaders do, right? Handle real decisions. I picked up my napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it beside my plate. Then I began clearing my place setting, the same gesture I had made at every dinner party for years. The same invisible labor that defined my role in this household. But this time, I wasn't disappearing into the kitchen. I was just clearing my own space. Wait, Lauren said. Wait, you can't just leave. We need to talk about this. I paused, holding my plate. We've talked for 15 years. You talked, I listened. Now the bills are talking. Maybe you should listen to them. I walked to the door. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of a world collapsing. Phones buzzing, Lauren's voice rising, guests murmuring in confusion. I picked up my keys from the table where I had placed them hours earlier. Damon, Lauren called. I opened the door. Where are you going? I stepped into the hallway. The cool air of the corridor wrapped around me like welcome. Figure it out, I said. You're in charge, remember? I closed the door behind me. Through the wood, I could hear Lauren's voice rising, the chaos of phones still buzzing with notifications, the stunned silence of an audience watching their assumptions crumble. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. The doors opened, I stepped inside, and as they closed, cutting off the sounds of everything I was leaving behind, I felt something I hadn't felt in 15 years. Free.